in Zimbabwe is that our government and our ruling party waited too long to address the land issue. And by the time they were in a mad Russian crisis, the economy was already going down. They could not deliver. The government was broke. So in the end, it was only political interventions with very little economic impact. That's what went wrong in Zimbabwe, and South Africa is making exactly the same mistake.
Good afternoon, and welcome everybody to this webinar of Public Affairs Research Institution. My name is Ngonyama Trugaldra, and I am a senior researcher on land issues. PARI is holding the seminar to look at issues of achieving land coherence in land governance in South Africa. And this webinar could not have come at a more opportune time, because right now the country is grappling with this issue. The institution that I work for, Public Affairs Research Institution, works to produce high-level research output, which should be used as a way to gauge the effectiveness of government institutions, as well as to inform policy and to improve policy implementation. So with me today, I'm joined by Professor Mandiwa Mbarukuni. I am joined by Dr. Margaret Trugaldra from Uganda. The professor is broadcasting from Zimbabwe. And I'm also joined by South Africa's very own Siyabu Manona. All three have got extensive experiences and insights in issues of land governance. I'll introduce them individually and ask them to take the panel. So the reason why we are holding this webinar today is to try and address the issue and unlock the deadlocks that we have been experiencing as a country in terms of so many years after independence. South Africa is still grappling with issues of gaining coherence in the land governance arena. There is no shortage of voices. We have the commercial farmers making noise. We have the civil society organization. There are also the traditional leaders, the government, which in itself is also split into different silos. We also have the landless people who are represented by youth, women, and women in farms who are some are farm workers, some are farm dwellers, and some are the tenants, labor tenants. We also have the knowledge producers who are civil society organizations. Some of them are based at the universities. And we also, as South Africa, are trying to conform to the international protocols, such as the Sustainable Development Guidelines, goals, as well as the FAO guidelines, and not to mention our own Africa Union guidelines on how to improve land governance, because it is the basis of all livelihoods. So it is for this reason we come here today. And in an effort to try and deal with the problem, South Africa has produced a slew of policies. There is no shortage of legislation. There is no shortage of institutions. And one of the most recent is the Presidential Advisory Panel on Land Reform, whose report also made some recommendations which were aimed at trying to reconcile this, the differences that we seem to have in land governance. And just yesterday, we're reading that a municipality in a Free State has come to an agreement with Eskom for the municipality to hand over 139 farms, which are used in lieu of its debt that the municipality owes Eskom, the power utility. And this has come as a bit of a shock to many, landless, people who are on the waiting list, in terms of how does ESCOM become to hold 139 farms in a place where there's so many other competing claims, and which policy is this in line with? So to give us a guidance and address this and some of the other land-related issues, I'm going to give over to our panelists. So first, I'm going to ask Professor Mandi Rukuni to address us. Professor Mandi is based in Zimbabwe. Welcome, Professor. He is a director at the Barefoot Education Trust for Africa, otherwise known as BEAD, and he has experience in development strategies in the area of agriculture, community development, business finance, education. Professor Rukuni has also facilitated
into my 10 minutes. Isn't that enough?
Yeah. Okay, so we'll hand over to Prof. Welcome to you.
Thank you so much, Gaina. And I must start by pointing out that such a pleasure to be invited over. And because you invited Margaret, I just could not turn that down because she's my mentor and friend, and I just love being on the panel with her. It enhanced my TV. Thank you so much for this invitation. So as already been indicated by Gaina, I mean, South Africa has almost everything it needs to address this stubborn issue of land. It's got the democratic institutions, structures. It's got fairly solid institutions, lots of legislation. And yet this issue is still very difficult to address for South Africa. And there are a number of reasons for this. And I think I was going to put on the table a kind of a framework, which I think could be one way of, if you may, being able to see the hierarchy of challenges, or if you put it positively, even construct a hierarchy of the desired futures. And I think the South Africans have done a splendid job of envisioning where their society is going to be by 2030. It's really great stuff. So the question is, where does the land issue come in, and what are the hierarchy of challenges and desired futures that we need to look at? First and foremost, I would say that the way in which South Africa is going to handle its land issues is arguably going to be the most important decisive factor in figuring out the future, the desired future. It's going to determine the extent to which this economy is going to be open, and the extent to which an average South African will be in a truly participative, growing economy. Land is almost the primary thing that is needed to restructure South African society to where the South Africans really want to go. So let me start by putting a premise on the table, which is a kind of political economy theory or premise. So because South Africa is in a very deep mid-income trap economy-wise, it means that, and you can go back into 20, 30 years of data and analysis, South Africa's economic growth rates have stagnated, and 2-3% at best, sometimes 4% for a few years, but on average, these are growth rates that will want to transform this economy. The equilibrium rate of unemployment has never come down for more than a couple of decades, and inequality is worsening. And if these are the indications of an income trap, political economy theories would also then add that as poverty and unemployment persists, and as gaps in income and possibilities worsen, the chances of coming up with public policies that are going to, so to speak, look acceptable to a large percentage of the population becomes less and less. That's why in the same country, you would have growing divergence in policy perspective. And I think the classic one in relationship to what we are talking about is 2017, I think it was, when the ruling party, the ANC, then opted for land expropriation without compensation. Now that to me was evidence of this theory I'm talking about. In the same country, you have major part of the economy driven by international capital. The bulk of the farms that supply 80% of the South African industry, just 5,000 farms, fully financialized, and most of it owned by the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and with lots of foreign investors. Besides that 5,000 farms who supply 80% of all manufactured food products, you have a good percentage of other farms who are also fully financialized and are going to be part of the global economy, producing food not for South Africa but for the rest of the world. Meanwhile, 55% of South Africans are not able to afford 3 meals a day. So at the top of the hierarchy then is a society and an economy whose structure cannot be resolved by the institutions that South Africa has, because having a fantastic constitution, having strong institutions of government, having the largest banks on the continent, and having a fairly solid judiciary, all that won't solve the structural challenges that you have in the economy. It requires a major shift in public policies across the board. And those are not necessarily delivered by a status quo set of institutions. So this unorthodox structural transformation that you have in South Africa in terms of this hardwired dual economy and a truncated domestic market, it means you are in a trap, and to get out of it, there's need to look at the options. And South Africa, just like other countries similar to South Africa in similar situations, Brazil as an example, and others, the classical solutions of getting out of this middle income trap have been classically trying to pursue export oriented industrialization strategies. They work to an extent, but they never create the number of jobs that you want to create. Import substitution, industrialization, same thing. You can use tariffs and so on, try and promote a few local companies to substitute imports. It does not create the jobs. The open economy industrialization is a non-starter for South Africa anyway, because the labor laws alone. South Africa won't allow a very cheap labor policy to be implemented. So the fourth option is really where I think we are. The fourth option is countries who have escaped this middle income trap are countries who basically then look at the dual economy, look at the percentage of the population which is still rural and poor. And after all, even the urban population, which is supposed to be urban, is not only unemployed, but they're not in Johannesburg or Gauteng because of jobs. They're not jobs. They're there because of services. So the rural agrarian transformation is arguably the single most important tool that has been used by China, South Korea, Malaysia, Vietnam as we speak, to escape that middle income trap and go to the next level. So I'm arguing here for that. I'm arguing for this idea of South Africa in a middle income trap, how to get out of it as the single most important problem to address. Before that is addressed, in my opinion, the rest of the problems, and there's a million of them, will never amount to a strategy. It becomes then difficult because you touch land tenure security, it's a problem, you run with it, you pick up holes in the land administration system. There's massive clash between customary laws and Roman Dutch laws in interpreting all these rights and how those rights are defined, recognized, and even protected. The land administration system, as we speak, excludes the majority of land users in South Africa. So I suppose I have spoken for long enough. So I'm just simply saying that, yes, land is still the most important tool, asset South Africa has to transform its society to a desired future. But before we deal with the structural difficulties, the structure of the economy, the structure of society, if we don't attack that with public policy, we'll be treating symptoms and not the problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you for keeping to your time, reminding us that unless we have a major shift as a country, we are going to be grappling with this issue for a much, much longer time. Next, I'm going to call upon Mr. Siyabu Manona, a land reform and policy expert with extensive experience in land governance issues in South Africa, specifically in rural development, urban development, policy implementation, rural livelihoods, local economic development, environment, and policy. Welcome, Mr. Manona. You have the floor.
Thanks, Doc. I think that was a brilliant start, Prof. Now, to start off, I think I want to get into a slightly different angle in exploring the issues at hand. The one issue from 1994, much of the discourse in South Africa has predominantly been around land reform. What land reform was about and what it continues to be is one issue. What has happened over the years is increasing fashionability of use of other terminologies and concepts such as land governance, land administration, which are highly controversial, poorly understood, poorly applied and thought of. Now, my starting point is that land governance and land administration are two sides of the same coin. And there are different schools of thought which all deal with this concept of land administration. Most of them you'll find it's land surveyors, they use it in their own way. GIS people use it and emphasize different aspects. So there's no common understanding in South Africa and internationally as to what a land administration is. It's defined for us by the West. So is land governance. Now, what I'm putting on the table is that we need to make a clear distinction between land governance and land administration on the one hand, which in my view and understanding, are levels of abstraction. One level of abstraction above the nitty-gritties of land reform. Land reform deals with issues of who owns what and who do you take from and give to who. Whereas land governance and land administration are about control of land. This is what South Africa's land reform policy has lacked from day one. Day one being 1994, and day minus being pre-1994. We've not thought about land governance and land administration holistically. We have thought of land reform, that is shifting land between different peoples, correcting imbalances of the past. Now, where are our problems lying in these two levels? And the history of South Africa with the coming of colonialism, we have a host of colonial institutions or legislation or laws that are put in place. Many of those are still in place today. Come 1991 period, apartheid government realizes, out of fear of what is going to happen to the future, because they were also trying to frame a path and create a rail for the new democratic government to move on. They put in a whole set of, close to 15 pieces of legislation. The highest number of pieces of legislation going through Parliament in a period of 2 weeks to preempt the new democratic pathway. The last of those pieces of legislation is the Ngonyama Trust Act. I'm not going to go through all of them. All of those pieces of legislation are still part of our land governance framework. Come 1994 onwards, because the new government was more, the issue was political, it was taking over political power. We inherit a whole lot of these laws from the past without questioning them. The only thing we did was to remove references to race and gender discrimination, things that would obviously, to anyone walking in the street, look like unconstitutional. And all of these laws we pull into the democratic order. In the process, we forget about all of this. We continue and start putting in place what was the white land reform policy, the white paper in 1997. And as we did that, it was followed by a whole host of new sets of land laws, which were only framed in the same structure as those inherited from the past. So we were basically repeating from a land governance perspective. It was a continuation of apartheid, but in the new order. That's
Thank
what
you,
we are currently. Yes. So that's what so just the last one. Now the issue now that we have to contend with is, firstly, we need alternative node, not just changing the institutions. We ask alternative ways of knowing land, knowing development, knowing land tenure, and start discarding the these notions which are embedded in colonialism and our apartheid past. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manola, for that call for the country to revisit the definitions, the Eurocentric ways, and the inherited institutions and ways of looking at land issues, which you are putting on the table, that they are not enough for the country to move forward. You challenge us to look at new ways of knowing, defining, and describing things. And I'll quickly move on to the next presenter, Dr. Margaret Trugaldra, who's an independent land governance practitioner with more than 20 years of public policy analysis, research, drafting, and settlement regularization experience. Dr. Trugaldra is joining us from Uganda, where she's going to share with us how Uganda has dealt with some of these issues. Welcome, Margaret.
Thank you, Gaina. I am sharing this experience based on my involvement in the process of developing Uganda's national land policy that was adopted in 2013, but I'd been involved with the process for 12 years backwards. And in terms of thinking about South Africa, I guess you are at a point where we were in our own process as a country in Uganda, where we had almost everything and we didn't know what to do next, or we didn't know what to do to move to the next step. And what I'm going to basically share is a couple of things that we did that helped move a process forward. And I'm assuming that the process already has a couple of things that have already been defined. For example, you have a clear vision, you have a set of goals and objectives, you have ensured some form of thorough way of vetting or explaining of issues to different stakeholders. You must have gone through a process where you have had a multi-pronged approach to collecting views, to making sure you gain political support or political buy-in, and you've done some level of public consultation, allowing different groups to have an opportunity to input, and you've spent a lot of time in planning and managing expectations and risks with such a process. Because if you don't do those 5 minimal steps, then the process of moving a policy process forward, it can be quite complicated. But I will say there were like 5 things that became key to moving the process in Uganda. One of them was a decision, a deliberate decision by the political leadership to address the land issue and to take on the policy-making process and be in charge. In essence, they decided, this is our process, we are going to lead it. And to lead it, we need a number of people. And in that process, therefore, they made a national land policy working group to which they invited the different stakeholders. But even if you invite people to a stakeholder group without defining what they need to do or what they need to give you, sometimes processes get derailed or delayed or they lose steam. So to keep that going, specific terms of reference were issued, timelines were set, and those things were strict. But I think for me, the more essential bit was the surprise that the government of Uganda decided to fund its own process. There was no donor resources involved on the government side of getting the policy done. So in terms of steps, there were like 5 steps that Uganda went through. The first was really a background study which produced issues papers, and issues papers were specific to frameworks defined as part of content of the policy. There was a framework that addressed legal and constitutional issues, land in terms of its legal value and its constitutional positioning, land in the economy, that was our second framework, and basically what it did was position land, the asset, vis-a-vis the other sectors that are natural resource dependent in the economy and define the forward and backward linkages that were needed. Then sorting the whole issue of land ownership and control, who owns what and who is in charge of which types of land, the definition of public land, private land, customary land, and all these things. And then the land administration, which Professor Mandy pointed out. Sometimes we have challenges around, land administration, processes are corrupt, Then we had also an aspect of land management and land use, and then the international and regional commitment. But I think also what was key is making sure that on the side of government, you do have a unit or a set of people or a team of people who are able to process what is collected. It's useless to collect views, memoranda, submissions from all stakeholders if you cannot process them. If you're not going to listen to what the stakeholders are saying and convert that into a policy issue or a policy principle or a policy option. So the statement of what exactly is wrong became a key defining thing. So you would have to define your land question in respect of the particular issue you're raising as a stakeholder. So giving stakeholders guidance on form of submission, what to submit on, and then having clear principles around what is priority in terms of a particular land policy. We had 5 guidelines on what is priority in terms of the policy, the national land policy that was being put forward, and that became a guideline for people to submit. And I think the other big issue about submissions from stakeholders was, don't frame the problem alone. Please frame a solution or what you see as feasible. And then in terms of solutions, also, it's to understand that a lot of technical solutions are never politically correct positions or solutions. And the decision maker, the person who is going to say, this is the path we take, is a politician. So be ready for a politician to push back and say, this sounds good, it's not going to help us and our constituencies. Once that is said, what are the other options the politician should consider? Have options so that the political buy-in process is a little bit easier. And I think really bottom line is the political side of the economy must be willing and committed to driving a policy reform process. Because if the politicians are not willing, then it doesn't matter how well you define issues, it doesn't matter what you propose, the decision makers must be willing to move the needle at a particular time. And because they are the decision makers, let me make one last closing thing. Because they are the decision makers, they hold the power. And the only way you respond to power is to have your information, your facts, and your issues framed properly. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Trugaldra, for sharing with us the do's and the don'ts from Uganda. Our main takeaway there, reminding us that the government of Uganda did do this on their own. They decided to fund it, which I suppose dealt with issues of power and influence. And the situation that we have right now, which Dr. Trugaldra shared with us, takes us to the next question that we are looking at. How do we get the stakeholders to collaborate? We have so many reports, so many policies. There has been more than one commission. People are kind of tired in the country. They've waited for too long. So the impatience is not unjustified. There's also a kind of a trust deficit that we are now seeing. And so Dr. Trugaldra was explaining to us what investment we need to make, what we need to agree on, and how to get the diverse stakeholders to find each other. And in that regard, in terms of advising how does South Africa move beyond this impasse to get to a place where Uganda is, I will invite Professor Rukuni to give us some remarks. You've got 5 minutes, Professor. And for people in the audience, please feel free to send questions to engage with the presenters. Thank you.
And now you asked me to do what? I was having a senior moment, so I missed.
It's okay. I was asking you to advise, to take up from where Dr. Trugaldra left off. How does South Africa move beyond the Pandora box of the different issues that they have to deal with? What is the roadmap? What are the processes that they must follow to get into a coherent then policy making process?
You know, when I was listening to Dr. Trugaldra, she presented the real, if you participatory democratic process that Uganda went through, and to some extent, South Africa has followed a similar pathway, except the only difference is that in Uganda, they implemented stuff. There was less talk and more action. And it was a good balance. In South Africa, my sense is, and I could be wrong because I don't live in South Africa, but I think there's more talk and less action. Land reform is never a perfect process, you know. And as we have learned in Zimbabwe, my own country, it's not what the professors think or what the pastors think or the politicians. In the end, society will make a move when they are stuck in a place for too long. And I think South Africa is just in that space where there are just too many issues they want to be right before they take major action. And I don't know that will happen. Waiting until everything is in place to have a proper land reform program and build your land sector not just requires action. Sometimes it's better to make mistakes by doing and learn from it, implement incrementally and so on. And I think in the case of South Africa, the driving force, as I see it, is that it's an increasingly urbanized society. It's an increasingly divided society, socially and politically. So the agrarian reforms are urgent. They are so urgent. I don't know how I could emphasize that. So I would simply say that a lot of the issues with your land governance challenges, as Dr. Manona explained, the land governance, land administration system is still very much driven by old laws and old institutions. As I said earlier, for instance, your Deeds Registry Act is out of date. It just caters for a small percentage of the population. So how are you going to develop a fit for purpose land administration system? Or the only way to deal with it is to, as Dr. Margaret said, you have dealt with a high level visualization of where you want to go. You even figured out the role of land in the economy, and you have consulted sufficiently. Take a move. The disappointment with failure or some failures with land reform up until now should not be an excuse for no action at all. Actually, those failures, for some of us who have seen this in our own countries, were expected. You were at a certain space. Instead of using that politically against yourselves, you should actually look at it positively. Here's what we did wrong. Here's what we learned. To be quite honest with you, you need 500,000 to probably 1 million small family farm type support systems to lift those people from earning less than $1 a day to earning $4 or $5 a day. You are done. That's all you need. You have enough capacity to do that. Half of those could be existing ones who are already in your communal areas and other places. The other half or so could be new farmers coming in from a land reform program. In 1993, when I was asked by the then President Mugabe to chair a land tenure commission, my first meeting with him, report back was simply, you know what? Commission of inquiry, another commission of inquiry, fine. Most of the people are saying we don't need another commission of inquiry. What we need is to see the land reform program move on. It's better to do 1 million hectares a year in South Africa of well thought through land reform, non-stop. Don't stop and wait. Just keep moving. You don't stop. And I think that more answers will come in as you implement.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor, for urging us to be more active, less talk, more action, as the professor says. We must be prepared to get our hands dirty. And there is no such thing as getting the perfect tools, institutions in alignment. We just have to get on with it and learn as we go. So the word from the professor and from up north is that it is urgent that something be done to get the process moving sooner rather than later. I will hand over to Mr. Manona to also give his reflections on this. How do stakeholders find each other so that we can get some traction on the issue of land governance?
Okay, thanks, Gaynor. On the technical things, I am a believer in information and data, specifically in the land sector, as a starting point for coherence, which is one of the things that are lacking in current situation that we're sitting with. Our information systems, data around land is fragmented within a single Department of Rural Development and Land Reform. You look at a parcel of land, you do not know whether there's a claim on the land or not, there's so much you cannot know, which is processed within a single department. So what my view is on this, we need what I want to call, in fourth industrial revolution terminology, we call a single source of information, single source of truth, where all different layers of information filter, you can filter them in one, log into one website and be able to sift what information you want and what you do not want and select. So that's the one thing for coherence. But that doesn't help government fragmentation, but it is, for me, a useful starting point. The second point I would like to make is moving. We can move as Prof proposes. I think I support that view, but there's extreme danger in moving with old tools which were designed for a different purpose. You're simply not going to achieve. One of the clearest examples of that is the debate around the Expropriation. Expropriation Act of 1975 has been sitting there all these years post-1994. It only became a politically hot potato 2 years ago. Why? Because everybody realizes this is an old instrument used that should be used to achieve a totally different purpose. So the point I was making with all these institutions that are inherited from the past, filtering and finding their way into the new dispensation, is that the tools that you have in place are inappropriate. You put in a whole new set of laws, but there's a bigger set of laws that lie underneath there, which you need for this entire juggling, for the entire implementation. This is what we've got laws here from early 1900s. which basically form the foundation of our land governance system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manona, for reminding us that, yes, you hear the calls for agency, but you'd rather we have the information systems in place so that we can have empirical evidence to use as a basis for making decisions going forward. And you reiterate the point about the limitations of using the tools that were designed in an entirely different context to try and address the challenges that we're facing now. I see, Mr. Speaker, you've got a hand up. So we're going to unmute the mic and allow Mr. Speaker Mahlake to pose a question to the panelists. Thank you. You've got 1 minute, Mr. Speaker. Please make a comment.
Thanks, Program Director. As much as I concur with the Prof. Manona, what I've realized in our land discourse is that without the recycling of ministers and regional land claim commissioners, wherein we have been submitting the petition in terms of us being stakeholders in land and other civil society organizations. Now you find that the recycling of ministers, you find that they turn minister of police, they shift him to become a minister of land affairs and administration. And this thing of deployment is compromising our cause, because we find that minister of police have no idea of land issue. Now, putting him in there to address the question of land from the landless, from the civil society organizations, you find that he falls short in terms of addressing the issue. Now, our submissions are piling, gathering dust in the offices of departments there. So now that is why this is a frustrating issue in terms of land, because we gather all information, we sit around, and we write petitions, we apply our mind, but now you find that they can't even respond to your submissions. Now you will go to workshop about land, policies after policies, minister after minister, but now we are not achieving our goal. And this is a very worrying factor. Now we'll have
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for voicing your frustrations. Mr. Speaker, as a member of the civil society organizations based in Mpumalanga, I also do hope that our policymakers are listening and taking note of the concerns that you've raised, which also underscore what we are learning from Uganda. I will raise a couple of questions which have come from the floor, and I will ask the panelists to address this as we come to a close, in asking them to say what are the capacities, Professor Rukuni, Dr. Trugaldra, and Mr. Manona, if you can highlight 2 things each, that the capacities that you think the government should have in terms of moving forward with this issue. So there's a question from Mr. Knight to all panelists. The question is, should we not take land owned by landowners like farmers, but instead we should take back the many kilometers of land that is illegally occupied? I don't think I said that properly. He says land use policies should be accompanied by action plans as annexures for national and each provincial and local government in order to measure performance of KPIs of these policies. And then the other comment was that thank you for the webinar. And Mr. Manona, how would you see the layer of occupiers' rights and other informer off-registers rights feature in a coherent land data system? So, Prof, I will give you 2 minutes to give your suggestions on the capacities that government needs to have, and the same for Dr. Trugaldra. And lastly, we'll give the floor to Mr. Manona to give his remarks, closing remarks. Thank you.
Thanks, Kaina. I think the most important capacity for the South African government is what, I know it's an overused term, but it's really developmental state capabilities, you know. A state which is capable of envisioning the future at once and then putting in place the institutional frameworks, of course, supported by the legislative and other, including a major budget architecture change. The current budget structure won't deliver transformation in South Africa because a lot of what needs to transform encompasses the entire economy, but your budget is split along these silos. So I think I'll just leave it at a public administration system which truly understands the kind of agrarian transformation, the kind of land reform that will deliver a new South Africa. That's the most important capability needed.
Thank you very much. If we have time, we'll come back to you, Prof, because I see a question saying what went wrong with land reform project in Zimbabwe. So, Dr. Trugaldra, I'll call on you to give your 2 or 3 recommendations on the capacity that the South African government needs to have in order to adequately address this problem.
From my experience and the Uganda experience, there was one consistent aspect of the Uganda National Land Policy process that helped stay the course of 12 years, even if the ministers were changing almost every other 3 years. That was resident within government. That is, government set up a technical team whose composition never changed throughout. So there was always an institutional memory. Whatever was submitted, it didn't matter who the minister was. Whenever I would receive a new minister, as the technical team, we would sit with that minister, update them technically where we were, and in terms of process where we were. And when questions arose, the technical team would give the technical input, the technical responses, the technical answers. Of course, by the time they are communicated to the public, there is some political correctness added. It was never straightforward. So the minister and the political leadership in the ministry would push the political agenda. But it was also the work of the technical team that never changed throughout, but it would absorb new actors. If a civil society came and they had a unique aspect and we were dealing with a particular issue where a civil society voice was needed, they could be co-opted for a particular purpose and then let go. So that ability to co-opt experts, ability to co-opt academia, to co-opt stakeholders from different parts, just to seek clarity and better solution on a particular land question was very, very important. And that's something the government and even the technical people in a government need to make a decision about and accept. And I think in that sense, it was not only mature, but it was a rather humbling gesture that was kept there. I mean, the minister could have decided to do away with the technical team, but always the permanent secretary in the ministry insisted for purposes of consistency and ensuring that the process had memory that was continuous. The other aspect I want to share that I noticed stakeholders deployed to keep government consistent on the agenda of a land policy was to consistently communicate how expensive it is not to address land issues through a land policy. They made it clear in many submissions in political activism that the cost of not having a policy is higher than no action. So make it very expensive not to take. If you don't take action, it is very expensive for you as a government, politically and economically. And if stakeholders can put that message across, everybody from your specialization. I remember we received a submission from civil society that was dealing with land conflicts. Guys involved in legal aid. And all they articulated was how much land conflicts were loading the dispute resolution system for the whole country. What cost that means in terms of institutions, in terms of judges, in terms of magistrates, that was so expensive. The guys who were on the environment side, from the environmental angle, computed the cost of inaction, unclear land policy in terms of loss of wetlands. And they produced data for 10 years, for 20 years, for decades, and they could put this value and put it before politicians and decision makers, and that started to change the conversation. So it became very expensive for a politician to sit in government or in cabinet and not make that decision. I remember when we had a moment to interact with the president, in cabinet, and he kept saying, one of the things is that we will be slaughtered in the polls if this is not dealt with. And you would actually give him options. If you make this option, the tenants will slaughter you. They will not vote for you. If you take this option, the landlords will not vote for you. This is a win-win for all of them. And that, you have to make those kinds of, discussions or arguments and options for a politician to be able to move the process for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Trugaldra, for reminding us that we need stability, continuity, and you also re-emphasize the need for a technical team to ensure stability and continuity. And that gem of how to keep politicians on their toes by constantly raising the issue, putting a cost to the whole issue of the gap in coherence in land governance in the country. We have been extended by a few minutes. We're running over time. I apologize for that. And I will give the floor to Mr. Manona and to give his recommendations on what does the government need to have in place, what are the capacities that they need. And the floor is yours, Mr. Manona. Mr. Manona? Okay, while we are waiting for Mr. Manona.
Yeah, am I audible now? Oh, thank you. I will go back. The basic issue in South Africa is information, data, data, data. That's our starting point. Then we can talk policy once we've fixed that. The second issue, which is a question which is raised here, is there's a question on how do we deal with off-register rights. One of the key issues which should have been the easiest things, easiest skills we should have done is to record all rights in South Africa within a diverse system, and as Prof was saying, make mistakes and adjust and move on. To date, we do not have a national address system, let alone a land record system about land rights. We don't even have an address system. Those are some of the basic justice issues that South Africa could have dealt with fairly easily and fairly quickly. Third point I would like to make is that state capacity in South Africa, where we are currently sitting, does not rely on the capabilities or manipulating the state, training, putting technical committees. South Africa needs more civil society involvement, more civil society engagement. Actors outside of the state, keeping the state in check. because that's where we're currently sitting now, with all the issues around state capture, which are not only, I mean, general issues. They've filtered right into land reform. They've filtered right into land governance. So we need an active citizenry. Universities need to rise, come to the party. Civil society formations need to come to the party for this country to be able to move forward on a policy, at the policy level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Manona. I believe this is an issue that Harry will have to accord more time. And I also know that there are other institutions in the country, such as Landness, Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies Institution at the University of Western Cape, who are also involved in this kind of deliberations. I will give the last remaining 2 minutes to Professor Rukuni to give us the final word and maybe give us a taste of what has happened in Zimbabwe and why, if at all, it should be used as a lesson for South Africa. Thank you.
What went wrong in Zimbabwe is that our government and our ruling party waited too long to address the land issue. And by the time they were in a mad Russian crisis, the economy was already going down. They could not deliver, the government was broke. So in the end, it was only political interventions with very little economic impact. That's what went wrong in Zimbabwe, and South Africa is making exactly the same mistake. You're waiting until you're broke, government has no money in the pockets, all the money is in the private sector. And the bad news for South Africa is when the economy eventually melts down like it did in Zimbabwe, you won't have the land. They will still have it, and they'll have the guns, and they can fight for longer than they did over here in Zimbabwe. So what went wrong? Not doing anything in time when you are still capable. Finally, when land is taken away from a few thousand white farmers to lots more black farmers, be serious about ensuring the new landowners have most of the support systems in place to succeed, from land rights all the way to support systems. It cannot just be a political move. Yeah, but the long and the short is, I think Zimbabwe is probably in a better space because at least the majority of the people have got the land, and maybe one day their children or grandchildren will make better use of it. I think when the wheels come off in South Africa, it's going to be mayhem. It's going to be a civil war. And that's my prediction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof, for those words of caution. I'm sure our policymakers are listening and taking note. At this point, I would like to thank everybody for coming to this brief but very deep discussion, which is the first of several that Parry is going to have around issues of land governance, specifically in terms of looking at how do we capacitate the state to use the resources at its disposal to deliver a better land governance process in the country. So I'd like to say thank you very much to Professor Rukuni. Thank you very much for Dr. Trugaldra for the Ugandan example that you gave us, which provided a lot of insights. And I'd also like to say thank you so much to Mr. Manona, who gave us the view from South Africa. And I'd like to thank everybody for attending this webinar. We have taken note of the questions, and we will try and get the panelists to address them. And I actually just acknowledge that maybe 1 hour was not enough. We will try and convince the panelists to reconvene so that we can continue this discussion. Have a good day. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Margaret, how are you?
Good. How are you, my dear?
It had to take the South Africans to. I've been waiting for a couple of years.
Yes.